Ho Xuan Huong is a legendary female poet in Vietnam during the Nguyễn dynasty. Through her sharp verses and valorous expressions of feminist idea, though considered anachronic in her times, she revolutionized generations of poets writing about Vietnamese women in feudal society. Most facts about her life and identity still remain a mystery and were majority revealed through Giang by scholar Nguyễn. Born in 1772 in Nghệ An province and died in 1822, she was later dubbed as Bà Chúa Thơ Nôm, the Queen of Nome Poetry by Xuân Diệu. Her literary career left some of the most outstanding and critically acclaimed pieces of work known widely by all Vietnamese and across the world. Heavily influenced by the feudal society and its treatment of women during her time almost 2 centuries ago, she became a voice for the powerless fate of women in a patriarchal world dictated by men, and frankly spoke for women's values and stance, which prevails even today. As of any poets, Ho Xuan Huong's work's main subject of interest is heavily influenced by her surroundings and background. Hiền, do you know anything about the periods in which she lived and how that might affect her writing?
From the end of the 18th century to the beginning of the 19th century, our nation experienced a period of volatility. The feudal regime began to face crisis and recession. This was the last straw for accumulated conflicts in the Vietnamese feudal regime. In the north, the powerful Trịnh clan controlled the lay kings and their court at present-day Hanoi. The Trịnh warred with the Nguyễn clan, whose southern Huế court was aided by Portuguese arms and French troops recruited by colonial missionaries. Finally, adding to decades of grim chaos, in 1771, 3 brothers known as the Tây Sơn began a populist rebellion that would vanquish the Trịnh, the Lê, and the Nguyễn rulers, seizing Hanoi, Huế, and Saigon, and creating their own short-lived dynasty that would soon fall to the Nguyễn. From 18th century to the first half of the 19th century, humanitarianism thrived, and at the end of the Lê dynasty, when the social status of women was sharply reduced, she constantly questioned the orders of things, especially male authority. While Ho Xuan Huong's poetic attacks on male authority might seem normal enough for Finlandicals, Americans, and other Westerners, for a time, it was shocking and personally risky.
Thank you, Hiền. Now, we know that Ho Xuan Huong's background is still largely a mystery, but many researchers have worked to try and uncover her life. Giang, can you tell us about some information that was learned?
Little is known about Ho Xuan Huong's childhood, as there is virtually no documentation about her family. It was best believed that Ho Xuan Huong was the youngest daughter of Ho Phi and his concubine Ha Thị. As her father was a teacher, she was familiar with languages at a young age. And after her father passed away, her mother remarried. Through growing up poor, Ho Xuan Huong was an incredibly intelligent and educated woman, proved it through her witty and clever delivery of words filled with riddles and metaphors, not to mention revolutionary feminist ideology. In spite of being a talented woman with a strong personality, the poet endured a great deal of hardship in her private life, having married twice, both as a second-rank wife, a concubine, a role usually looked down upon in Vietnamese society. Her first marriage was with Tổng Cốc, a local official, which only lasted shortly as she decided to leave after receiving jealous outbreaks from his first wife and other fronts from outsiders. She was pregnant at the time and gave birth to a daughter after leaving. However, only 3 months later, her child died prematurely. She wrote a poem named Crying Tổng Cốc to cry for their relationship, and they considered it as a divorce. Her second husband was Vĩnh Tường, a slightly higher local official. Together, they had a son named Phạm Vĩnh Thiệu. But the marriage also ended after Vĩnh Tường died only 6 months after remarriage. suffered from the fate of being a concubine from both marriages that end unhappily. She boldly expressed her frustrations on sharing a husband. Screw in the fate that makes you share a man. One cuddles under cotton blankets, the other's cold.
Yes, her life was truly fascinating. The secondary positions in life as women also became inspirations for many of her renowned poems and contributed vastly as the main subject of interest throughout her career. She mainly uses chữ nôm, an old complex Vietnamese character system derived from ancient Chinese before it was replaced by chữ quốc ngữ, which Vietnamese use today. Her use of a Vietnamese invented language instead of chữ Hán, the Chinese characters, which were much more well known at the time, helped proliferate the use of Vietnamese as a literacy language. Not only was her predominantly writing style unconventional, but her poems also centered around a much controversial and insurgent theme, female pleasure and sexual desire. She was a master at wordplays that convey sexual innuendos and risque humor. Hiền Minh, you're familiar with many of her work. Is there a poem in particular you were impressed with?
Her poem Quả Mít, or The Jackfruit, is a prime example of her liberating the use of the metaphor, the jackfruit, to imply a different meaning regarding women's bodies. My body is like a jackfruit swinging on a tree. My skin is rough, my pulp is thick. Dear Prince, if you want me, pierce me upon your stick. Don't sweet, I'll ooze and stain your hands. Chin, 2008.
Mai Chi, how do you feel about her theme, which is very unique in her time?
Well, in my opinion, her poems might be of shock value at first glance, especially in fewer days, when audiences not used to having a female figure so openly daring in her opinions about sex. But at a deeper glance, they actually portray rebellions of heroines through their belief, struggles, and frustrations in dealing with life and with the men responsible for shaping their lives. For instance, she once wrote in her world-famous poem named Bánh trôi nước, "My body is white, my feet softly rounded, rising and sinking like mountains and streams. Whatever way hands may shape me, at center, my heart is red and true." So, as you can see, the personification of this Vietnamese traditional cake, bánh trôi, represented not just only hers, but also the powerless fate of all women in her time, voicing her statement that even though she had to live with her life afloat, she would not surrender to people's tainted image of her, a concubine, but instead maintain an unyielding, pure, and righteous heart. And she never cared about being looked down on or scared of social norms. She bravely stood up for herself and women everywhere through her short verses and deliberate attacks on man and societal standards of a good woman. According to Confucian values, women should always follow the rule of three subordinations, also known as tam tòng, which are subordinating to her father at home, subordinating to her husband after marriage, and subordinating to her sons after her husband's death, and also the four virtues. In other words, công dung ngôn hạnh, including housekeeping skills, beauty, appropriate speech, and moral conduct. These were the standards that made up a good woman that would honor a household in feudal society. And in some Vietnamese regions today,
How would you like to weigh in from Mai Chi's comment?
Never have there been a woman so prone to rebel in a society that constantly prohibited her to do so. Ho Xuan Huong has to fight and rebel against a prolonged system of sexism and dominance, and left an unwavering impact as a voice for women and revolutionary feminists. Those who have many obstacles and critics throughout her career for simply being a woman, writing poems. As time prevailed, she has gained a cult follower who admire her brilliant mind and outspoken ideology. Prominent literacy figures praise her for her talent, along with moment commemorations of her legacy. Notable mentions include the story Chút tháng Xuân Hương by Nguyễn in 1985, the song Bánh trôi nước by Ho Anh in 2017. Her name was also used for a street in Hanoi, Ho Xuan Huong Street in Hai Bà Trưng District, as well as other lost cities in Vietnam like Ho Chi Minh City, Hải Phòng, Nghệ An, Thanh Hóa, Đà Lạt, and Giang, as a way to remember her legacy. Recently, on November 3rd, 2021, Ho Xuan Huong was honored by UNESCO as one of the most influential cultural figures in Vietnam. Regarding her work, Balaban, the American translator of Spring Essence, the poetry of Ho Xuan Huong, said, because of her stunning poetic cleverness, she and her poem survive.
Almost 2 centuries have passed since Ho Xuan Huong's emergence into the literacy world of Vietnam. She was and will always be remembered as one of the most influential people of her time. With her numerous explorer of erotic themes and taboo topics, she brought a new wave into poetry and was a feminist voice for poets everywhere. Her off for women's values and freedom becomes increasingly more relevant with times and represents a bold, liberating view on what it means to be a woman. Ho Xuan Huong was truly a feminist symbol and poet's icon in Vietnam history.